This episode contains mature themes, language, and discussions that might not be suitable for all audiences. We believe in open and honest conversations that sometimes involve exploring topics that can be sensitive or challenging. Listener discretion is advised. My name is Shantell Martin, and I'm the host of What's the Point? This is a conversation series dedicated to exploring why artists create art and the forces that influence us. Join me as I sit down with artists and friends to talk about their reasons for doing what they do and why they continue to create.
For me, the point of art is creating your own language.
A lot of times when I shoot, I think of how's this going to look in 10 years?
I don't really think about the individual colors as much as I think about how they play off of each other.
Oh, the point is the journey.
And I start to get a sense of what the painting is going to be like.
Because the point of art could simply be just to make it.
I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Greg Ito. Greg is a multidisciplinary artist involved in a variety of fields, including museum and gallery exhibitions, public works, and design projects. He heavily incorporates personal and family narratives into his work and deals with themes of love, loss, hope, and tragedy. He has been featured in numerous art galleries around North America and Asia, as well as having multiple public art installations across California. Greg, welcome. Greg, thanks so much for coming in today.
Of course.
Nice. So we just met recently in New York, one of my favorite cities. So tell us about what you were doing up in New York.
So I was in New York because I was in support of the Art Production Fund. I recently worked with Casey and Kathleen on a public sculpture for Frieze Los Angeles, which
fantastic.
We were so happy that the fair didn't cancel this year because of the fires. So I worked with them to create a new large-scale inflatable sculpture, which was presented at the front of the fair along the road going into the Santa Monica airport. And I was in New York because I donated a piece to their auction. So it was really fun. It was my first time to be able to hang out with the New York socialites and all these artists that I admire under one roof, celebrating public art and also just having discussions on how to continue shaping, the world that we live in through public art, as well as finding people to support that. So
fantastic. So tell us about the piece that you had at Frieze. What was that?
So the piece at Frieze was called A Time to Bloom, and it was a large-scale inflatable that was about 15 feet wide by 25 feet tall. And my artwork is really based in symbolism. So I worked with Frieze and Art Production Fund and choosing one of my symbols together that really resonated to the current time. And originally, it was actually a candle that was lit, so it had a small flame, and there was like flowers growing out of the candlestick holder that was like the vessel that was holding it. But then in January we had the fires, so that was extremely devastating to see my city being impacted in such a devastating way, and we had to pivot. So we were like, okay, we don't want to be insensitive by, including a flame on this candle. Maybe there's another way or another symbol that we can utilize from your visual vocabulary that just speaks to more about the time after the fires. And so I proposed doing this clock. It was like an alarm clock. It was a golden alarm clock. And out of the top of this clock, crowning the whole piece, was these orange blooming flowers coming out of the top. And for me, it was a symbol for really just, it is a time to grow, It's a time for us to come together and nurture the community and the soil that we live on, and to grow upwards instead of finding yourself just in that mood, that things are never okay.
Yeah. So the first sculpture, the inflatable, had you made that already, or?
That was my first sculpture of that kind.
So that one for Art Production Fund, did they physically make it and then decide not to use it before you pivoted?
Well, we were actually getting bids at the time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I was getting bids from different manufacturers, and it was also funny because it was a time when the tariffs were starting to get, like those conversations were
Yeah.
starting to be held. So we were like, maybe we shouldn't make this thing in China because is it even going to make it back to LA in time? And, my friends have put me in contact with some really great fabricators out there, but they were also going on Chinese New Year. So all the factories completely shut down in February. And we're like, you know what? I think it's best if we just make this domestically. So as we were getting the bids from domestic fabricators, that's when the fires happened. And that's when we were able to find a small window to redesign what we wanted to do and the conversations around that and making sure that the optics for this project were very aligned with the conversations being held at the fair.
What was it like seeing your work in inflatable form?
It was pretty cool, like I've never seen one of my images that big before. It's really fun though because I have a 4-year-old daughter. Her name's Spring. And just like seeing her interact with inflatables for birthdays and going to these like pop-up events and stuff that are very like tailored to like children. So when I was making this, I really just was channeling like my inner child because I was like, I want to make something that's fun, something that's uplifting, something that's not so serious in this like artsy way, like overcritical and, packed with theory and all of this stuff. Like, I just want to make something for people. And that was one of my main goals this year is like make art for people and in spaces where people spend their time, which is in the outdoors, and I just remember like, growing up in LA, you're always in a car. And this was before iPads. So my iPad was the car window, just sitting at the window and looking at the billboards and, like the buildings. And one thing that I always love looking at are like the funny inflatables on top of like car dealerships, like King Kong and he's like holding a car. And it's just a fun dialogue to have with people, that are just commuting on their day-to-day stuff, And I wanted to make something uplifting because when you're out in public space, right? And like us just interacting and everybody in this building, it's like, oh, hi, how are you? Oh, I'm good, welcome, good morning. And everyone's like being their positive social self, right? Behind that thin layer that we all kind of project into the world, there's a lot going on inside. We're all dealing with so much uncertainty, so much there's so much sadness and fear and just all these like really not the best feelings, right? But we carry it with us, trauma, generational trauma, identity. It's endless, right? But it all comes down to like, oh, how are you? Oh, I'm good,
Yeah, it's funny that.
And so for me to make a piece that could really resonate with people's subconscious mind when they're looking at this clock with the flowers growing, and the clock is like there was no movement in the clock, but it emphasized that time was being told, It was still unfolding and, everyone was excited for the fair, but at the same time, like, I'm a local. So I had like tons of friends and family that were impacted by the fires. And it's sad, it was sad seeing so many people lose everything. Even artists, like there's so many amazing artists that just were like, well, we got to keep making art and got to show it. And the fair was like, we're not canceling. It's this big, big boost of morale in LA. LA really needed it because, after the elections and then New Year's and the fires, it's like we couldn't catch a break,
It was nonstop.
Yeah, and that's how it is in a lot of parts of the world, right? Like, we only see what's right in front of us.
So you're born and raised here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, born and raised in LA. I'm fourth generation. So my great grandparents moved from Japan to LA in like 1912, I think it was. And my grandmother was born here. So we've been in LA for over 100 years, which
Wow.
is super awesome. It's really weird to think about it like that too. But
And have you and your family always been in kind of a similar part of LA, or have they moved all around?
yeah, well, their history's a little bit more complicated because before the war, they were mostly living in Boyle Heights, which is just on the other side of the river from where we are right now in the Arts District. That was a really big Japanese community, and also near Crenshaw area and Sawtell on the west side. But then during World War II, they were all interned to be sent to the different camps, around California. On my maternal side, it was Gila River. And on my paternal side, she went to Poston. And, that was a dark period of time, a number of years that they were there and they got released. Then they had to relocate. They actually came back to LA because that was where they called home. And they grew up mostly on the west side and in the valley. So LA, the greater LA area. Yeah.
Did your grandparents ever really speak about that time?
Not too much.
Yeah.
I remember my grandmother, my mom's mom, we talked about it. I had my first grade teacher was Japanese. Her name was Mrs. Ikegami. And she was so cool because, I grew up in a Japanese community, and having a teacher that was Japanese, I really, felt proud, because you don't grow up seeing so many people there's not too many pockets of Japanese people. And my grandmother came in. It was the first time I ever heard her talk about the camps. And we made I made an art project, which was I basically made a camp. So I'm made this chain link fence, with barbed wire and the guard towers and the barrack. And I'm for my class project. And then she came in and talked about it. But after that, I never really heard much, I think she really came in to be there for her grandson's class and tell about the story. But growing up, she never really talked about it in much detail, And whenever I wanted to talk about it, she would always pivot, Grandma, tell me about this, or what'd you eat in the camps, And as you get older, you want to know more and more. And she's like, oh, let's not talk about that. Go here, take the Jell-O and take it to the table, or, clean this, or take this iced tea to your grandpa, So I never really heard too much. And I didn't want to press it either, And as I got older, I being an angsty person, rebel, or always finding things to be upset about. I was like, why aren't they telling me these things? I want to know the details. I want to know, more what happened and treatment, and I never really got it out of them in time. Because as they got older and older, my grandfather passed away, and then my grandmother had a stroke, and she had this thing with her stroke. You know how people get a little bit, their brain works a little differently after a stroke. And whenever she would get emotional, even if it was happy or sad, she would burst out crying, so heavily crying that she couldn't even talk. So if I were to bring up anything like that, it was emotionally triggering her, From that to just, giving her a hug, she would just start crying. So I was like, I'm not gonna bring these things up, But I learned later, after they passed away, that I really felt that they didn't tell me to kind of protect me, I was watching that show Pachinko. Have you seen that one?
Yeah, I watched that.
And there's this moment where he's like, Grandma, why are you why are you doing this to me? You're making my life so hard. She's like, well, because, you got to feel our burden, This is where you came from. This is who you are. And I had the opposite effect to that where I was like, oh, well, they weren't burdening me. And I'm so grateful for that because I don't want to be put under that kind of like they didn't want to put that pressure on me. And like, you see so many people grow up really like angry and upset about the past and they just can't like grow from that, like they hold on to it. And, I think it's important for us to tell our stories. But also something that I've learned through making art is that this is their story. It's not my story. This was their experience. Whatever they experience, good or bad, joy, sadful, like that was their story. And I can only just wonder what they were thinking about.
Yeah.
At the time, like one of our family stories that really inspires my work is that how my grandmother and my grandfather, they fell in love in the camps. So before they were like together, he would make these little wooden carvings and he would gift it to her. These like beautiful little wooden carvings. And my mom has them in a frame. My brother made a beautiful frame for it. And there's just like these little Disney-inspired carvings that he would gift to her because, they're in the middle of nowhere, right? It's just the desert and there's no stores. So he would make these little carvings and gift it to her. And that's where they fell in love. So, without the camps, our family wouldn't be where we are today, like quite literally, And, that's just like one of those stories that I carry with me as I make my work.
And so thinking about that, like the stories that you carry with you and your family and the past, where does the symbolism come from within your work? Your work is kind of, it's heavily rooted in these symbols. Are they ones that kind of come to you? Do you discover them? Do you seek them out? Are you finding them in your family's kind of stories? Like, where are they coming from?
Well, a lot of the symbols that I pull come from things that I see around myself. I think when I visited like museums and, like, when you look at museums, right, and you look at these like old works, like these still lives, there's like a set of symbols that they use to, tell a story of the times, and I really loved how symbols can carry meaning, like an owl, right? Like when did the owl become a sign for wisdom, right? Like, I don't know, but somehow it just over time and through the use of the symbol, it just becomes imbued with this like energy of this like idea of wisdom. And so it just kind of like, flows into me. And also one of my favorite books is Goodnight Moon. Like I love that book growing up.
I don't know that book.
You don't know Goodnight Moon?
No, what's it about?
It's just like it's a children's book that a lot of Americans grew up with, and it's like like you say good night to everything in the room and it like rhymes, so it's like good night, good night moon, good night socks, good night kitty cats and whatever, but the way the imagery is laid out, it's really inspirational to my work. Like this really like flat, colorful, crisp way of like depicting an interior. And the way that they're drawn out is very like symbolic, And so like those kinds of influences like help me choose the symbols that I pull into my work. Primarily the ones that come up a lot are time-based symbols because that's what I'm really fascinated with is like how we spend our time, how we make time, how time is fleeting, how time can slow down, memories, present and future self. So candles are a huge one, clocks, hourglasses, and symbolic motifs around change, transformation. So flames, flowers, floods, sunsets, moon phases and sun, like those all get integrated into this like tapestry that I'm weaving through like my visual language. Because essentially what I want to do with my paintings is storytell. You know, telling stories is like one of the best, most genuine way to connect with people, you know? Because if you can't teach a lesson, you could tell a story that teaches the lesson. And it's almost easier to teach someone through a story than it is by trying to tell them like the facts, you know? And so that's one thing that was hard for me, like with a lot of art, is sometimes it's too factual for me. And sometimes I feel like, oh, maybe I'm not smart enough to like, you know, to understand this art. And that's not a good feeling, you know? I feel like art should be accessible. So just like a children's book, how kids can be confronted with these kind of dynamic, emotional situations through storybooks that are very like simplistic, you know? And I love the way that the information is translated and kind of integrated into a child's mind on how to navigate, you know, waiting your turn and what is like sharing, what is friendship, what does it feel like to be like sad, and like how do we come out of that? And they're just like deconstructed or kind of distilled into these like simplistic ways of like of language, right? And one of them is the storytelling of the words, but also just the images that are in the book.
Yeah.
So I really love that. So that's why I like symbolism and using it as a tool in my studio kind of toolkit is really important.
So because time plays such a prominent role in your work, you know, you're thinking about time a lot. Does that affect the way that you actually spend your time when you're not making art?
Oh yeah, so much. Me growing up, you know, my grandparents were always hard workers, right? They're like the hard workers, working class type people, you know? And then they worked really hard to make a better future for my parents, right? And then my parents worked really hard to become like pharmacists, which is like a higher kind of pay grade job than their parents, you know? So then it's like, come to Greg Ito, you know, firstborn. It's like, you got to work really hard to get what you want. Like I was like, that was pounded into me. And I always grew up being this like overly obsessive worker, you know, like, my brother's, he clowns on me sometimes like, dude, you're just such a maximalist in everything that you do. And it's true, you know, like when I given an opportunity, I put my whole heart into it, you know, or like relationships, you know, you got to really put your best foot forward. And then there's results that come out of that. But I don't know, like in my contemporary life that I have, like now that I have a family and stuff, like I used to work like 2-3 jobs, you know? Before I was like more showing and selling work, right? So I had my full-time job, and then I had my studio. So the full-time job paid for my life. But then I had to have the second job to pay for my studio. And then in my studio, that's my third job, to like be an artist. And, you know, you just do what you got to do to get there. And I never really challenged that work hard mentality. But now that I have a daughter who's 4 years old, you know, the first few years, I definitely worked my butt off, like as much as I could. You know, I wasn't an absent father by any, you know, sense of that word or label, you know, but I was very grateful for the quarantine period, because without it, I wouldn't have had my daughter, and I wouldn't have this like so much time to just like really spend with her. And yeah, it made me realize that the time that I spend with my family outside of work, that's what really fuels me, you know? Because if I'm in the studio grinding and I'm not spending those full days with my family just unplugged, like I feel so drained, you know? And then you become questioning like, well, what's the point of all this work if I'm not spending it with my family? And you ask these questions, right? And then you look around like all the young professionals that are starting families, and we're all asking the same question. It's like, what's this like life, you know, work-life balance? And for me, it's not really I know a lot of people will be annoyed at hearing this because, as an artist, we can kind of craft the world that we want to live in, and that's like one of the beauties of being an artist. It's really challenging because it's like the most uncertain thing that you could ever walk into. But like, it's not about work-life balance. It's more about like work-life integration. Like, how do you make your life fuel your work, and then how is your work become your life, And I just got a new studio, which I'm super happy about, but because like now I can like bring people there and like we can hang out. There's a lot of room, I have a friend of mine who I invited. He makes these little sculptures. They come hang out, make sculptures. My daughter has a studio. We're pulling her out of preschool today so that we can spend more time with her before she goes to real school, to kindergarten. And my wife runs a gallery, so she can kind of do whatever she wants time-wise. So now we can just spend the days in the studio together, and I can be fueled by their presence and the time that we spend together as a family. And that could be like directly kind of it could directly charge the studio as I'm working.
Yeah. I love that you brought this like community aspect into the studio so that there's other energy in there that can feed you. Mm-hmm. That your daughter has her own space as well.
Yeah, because I felt like, I don't know, it's like when you're an artist, right? It's like you're working, you make your work, you get a nice, people start showing it, you start working with galleries and stuff, and then you kind of lock in with a gallery. And like, before you have so much community, right? But then when you become like a working artist, it's just like, oh, just go in your studio and paint, and like, we got this and this and this plan. So that's all you got to think about. And it kind of like pulls you away from the community a little bit,
Yeah.
As like a functioning component, like one that outputs energy and then also accepts the energy. I feel like being stuck in your studio just working and being disconnected from community, it's like you're not really offering that energy other than just like your show, right? Or like my project. And what I've learned recently, it's like community is like so important. So, I'm channeling I'm navigating these new chapters for my studio that isn't fully reliant on one gallery, but like this more kind of cohesive network of, various people that want to integrate their energy into the studio and offer their resources and to collaborate together. And that's opened so many possibilities up because just in an exchange with someone that you haven't seen for a long time, so many like amazing ideas can sprout. And then it's up to just like being in touch and hanging out and being excited about those things to like continue to grow them. And I didn't find myself being successful as a gardener, just being like stuck in my studio by myself.
Yeah.
I'm big on energy. So if I think of myself as a light source, I can only grow so much with only my own light. I can only like sustain, a few plants that could really grow to the potential that I wanted. But if I like open up the box that I found myself in, right? And you look around you, there's so much light. You just got to like pull it in, It's like, and this is light from different people, different, it could be a brand, or it could be, a corporation. It could be an agency. It could be just a friend. It could be a neighbor who then is like, hey, my brother-in-law does this, and you guys should meet and hang out, and just being open and being like, okay, yeah, like, let's hang out. And then they're like, hey, I'm actually working on this project for, this arena or something. It's like, you really have no idea what's out there, So, the lesson I learned is like, the more light, the better. But you got to be outside of the box to be able to receive it.
I love that way of thinking. It's almost like we're these little pixels of light. And, if you can combine those pixels, then you have a much bigger kind of light panel. And then you're much more powerful with what you can do with that and where you can go.
Mm-hmm. It kind of reminds me of your drawings. Like the line, you follow the line, But then that one motion or that gesture of a line could influence the decision of like how it changes the drawing, and like, oh, this becomes this person, and we're going to do this. And then, oh, wow, another person was found here. Like, you don't really see it until it's happening in front of you. That's why, like, the way that you work is really nice. It's so present, you know? It's not too pre-planned, not too, like, rigid, you know? And by the end of your drawings, there's like all these faces and all this like activity and all this energy kind of happening like on the surface in this very like simplified way, which is like hard to do.
Yeah.
Really hard to do because people tend to overwork things, you know? That's like life, right? You can overwork things so much. But if you're fluid and you just like let it do its thing, then the job gets done eventually, you know? And that's the thing. That's something I battle every day as an artist because I have like my grandparents' like work ethic and like their hardships kind of like in my DNA. But like where I am right now, it's like I want to honor those lessons that I've learned, but I don't want to carry them as a badge of honor. You know, I think in my younger life, past lives, like you hold these things as a badge of honor and it kind of like it becomes a part of your identity too much, you know, where you can't grow outside of it. So, you know, when I approach my art, it's like the conversations around my art these days, it's like, well, my art is not about the Japanese American experience. It's just what I know because it's part of my DNA. But I use that experience as the seed of inspiration for these others, like these other conversations that I want to have in my work, which is like, you know, one surrounding like the human experience and this like spectrum of darkness and light that we live in, you know, like all of life's dynamic moments live in the shades between like black and white, right? And, you know, creating work that is really accessible. Because when I'm painting flames and flowers and day and night and like presenting these kind of versions of the real life that we live in, it's almost like a dirty reflection, kind of revealing, you know, like the inner conversations that we have through my symbols and the motifs that I paint. I want people to be able to expose their inner stories, you know? Being vulnerable with each other is like the moment where like people like connect, you know? It's like sitting around a campfire, you know? Like you sit around a campfire with people that you have no idea who they are, but there's this primal urge to just like let it all out because it's like you're sitting around a fire like, you know, cave people. And you just talk about your life under the stars, and then they could be people from completely different corners of the earth. But probably after that, you know, moment together, there is somewhat of a bond. But we don't get that anymore because there's so many layers between people.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about that recently, kind of those very simple moments in life that we don't need to give permission for, that create these very simple connections. So like the act of just sitting, like you say, around the fire and sharing and talking, or the act of walking, or the act of breathing, or the act of meditating, or the act of drawing. You know, like these are very just simple instinctive things that we do that connect us, that open us, that allow us to share. And, you know, it's interesting kind of your points about like the drawings that I create. I think in a similar way to you, I'm trying to create work that's accessible, that flows through me, versus work that I'm trying to over-conceptualize, that creates all these kind of over-educated barriers between the viewer and the work. What I'm doing is I'm just allowing the work to be what it is. And it's interesting, you know, if I'm drawing on a 100-foot wall, you know, I'm so close to the wall, I can't see what I'm drawing. So you're just drawing, you're allowing it to flow in the way that it needs to. And then you step back and you're like, oh, okay, it works. Because you're not over planning, you're not trying to be too intentional, you're not thinking about what someone else might do. You're just being yourself, you're being present, you're showing up, and you're just allowing the work to flow through you. And then I think in that instance, it becomes accessible, it feels balanced, it feels like it works, it's not overworked. And there you create that bridge for connection. And I think, you know, quite similarly with your work, the symbols you're using, the stories you're telling, the colors that you're choosing, the way that you compose the drawings and how everything comes together, or maybe painting in your instance, I think those become bridges between people so that they feel like they can share, or they want to kind of consume the work. And I think, your work is definitely, you can look at it for a long time and it feels good. There is this bridge or this window that it creates where you want to look at it and you feel like you could be a part of it. And I think that might be something in the flatness of it, or the color that you're choosing, or the way that you're constructing it. But you definitely feel that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, life is wild, right? Like, like we hear this all the time, right? I'm sure you've had this conversation like a million times, like this week. But it's like people are like, oh, it's such crazy times now. It's such terrible times. And it's like, yeah, times are tough. And like, fear is all around us. And there's so much uncertainty with like, political stuff and, climate change and all of that. But we also live in a really good time where it's like we could talk about meditating and, self-care and, identity and, all these conversations that never really existed before, right? Or they did, but you couldn't really talk about it.
Yeah.
And like, manifesting, energy work, like all these things seemed so far away. Like when I look at photos of me when I was little, it's like it just seemed like such a different time, and I take a few steps back every day when I get overwhelmed by like the news and stuff. And it's like, well, normally we wouldn't see all this news, but now it's just so in your face, Instagram, it's like the things that you don't have is so in your face, the things that you want to have, the things that you haven't gotten yet. So, you have to live in the world that you create for yourself, and if you find it working for you and there's other people that want to be a part of that world, then you let them in, and you live in it together, I just, as an artist, it's like, I want to help shape a world that I want to see myself living in and my daughter living in, and just like future generations of just people, one that's full of like art, conversation, dialogue, exchange, cultural exchange, integration, like blurring the lines, taking those boundaries down. But you can only do it by being present and actively doing it. Like you said, with your drawing, it's so big, it's so beyond your peripheral that you just have to be in it and do the work. And then by the time you feel that it's done, you take the steps back and then it's done. You see it, But the whole act of making the drawing was the journey. It was like almost the journey of making the piece. That was the art form for you. And now people can just enjoy the product of your, the act of making art, And that's for me. That's why I love collaborating, sharing moments like this with you on the podcast, because you kind of go in with like, you don't really have, it's better to go with like, not like fortified, like, ideas of what you want to get out of it or whatever, you're just like, you're just going there to exchange energy and like talk and see what grows from that. And, just from the time that we spent so far, it's amazing to see that there are more people, more artists that think like me. Because, when you're in the studio working, it's hard, because you're in your own zone. But it's nice to make sure that you stay connected,
Mm-hmm.
So
completely. And so, like, just jumping kind of back a little bit, born and raised in LA. Did you then go to high school? Did you go to art school? What did that journey look like for you?
So I grew up in LA. I went to elementary school, middle school, and high school in LA. When I hit like towards the end of my middle school years, I really kind of took a turn where I really just didn't like school. I think it's because I got into some trouble, and then like outside in, voices, the adult voices are like, Greg's a troublemaker, he's a bad kid. And then you kind of instill that image on yourself where you're like, okay, well, fuck, I don't care about all this school stuff, I'm just gonna do me. But at the same time, I was just like lost, because I didn't feel fully accepted anywhere, So in high school, I really did not do well. I was like anti doing school. I was as soon as I would get to school, I would ditch, go to Venice Beach, hang out with my friends, like smoking, travel, getting the car, going on like joyrides, sneaking out of the house all the time, sneaking out of the house, going out all night, coming home at like 3 a.m, and then sleeping throughout the whole day at school. So I was like not into it. And it got to this point where my teachers were like, Greg, we need to have a meeting with your parents and all of your teachers. And I was like, okay. And they're like, yeah, it's bad. And I was like, all right. So then I went to the meeting, and it was like this roast session where all my teachers were ragging on me. Like, he doesn't do his work. He doesn't care. He doesn't show up. He just sleeps. He's going to get held back. Da, 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 da. And I had this one teacher, my French teacher, who was like, you know what? Like, we're all giving Greg a hard time, but what he does excel in is that when I give him like an art project to do, he does it. And he does it great, and he gets a good grade. And it's these art projects that save his butt, because otherwise he would really be flunking, He's like, I know he doesn't like know French, but at least he's like doing the work when it comes to an art project. And the other teacher's like, yeah, I'll give him that. And they're like, all right, well, maybe we'll switch our focus. Greg should probably do more art stuff. So then I went to like the drawing class, and then eventually I did art, the AP art class, which was the college level studio class. And that was really amazing, because that's when I felt like I reconnected with something that I lost maybe in my earlier years, this connection to like drawing and making art, I think I just like got tired of hearing like, don't be an artist because you'll be a starving artist, and that made me really upset. And I was just like taking it out in so many different ways. But yeah, I got reconnected with art in high school. I went to a art program at Cal Arts. It's called CISA, the California State Summer School of Art, where all the weirdo art kids from everywhere across the country went. You apply with a portfolio, and then if you get accepted, you get to live on the campus at Cal Arts. And you live in the dorms, and you're just with a bunch of other weirdos that are like dancers and musicians and writers and painters and sculptors, and the whole art, there's a big art vibe. And that was amazing, because it was the first time I really felt seen, And when I came back, I was like, I'm definitely going to art school. So that's also where I first met my wife, Karen. She was there at this program as well. And I met so many great people there that I still hang out with. And after that, I moved to San Francisco. And in San Francisco, I went to the San Francisco Art Institute, SFAI, which closed recently. So that school is completely done. But just being in that city is like I love the Bay Area. Like, I definitely left my heart in San Francisco kind of vibes, because every time I go there, it's just such a magical place. And it was a great place for being an artist at the time. I was there from 2005 through 2015. And, I was working to be an artist. And it was during these times I was really community driven. So I started an artist run gallery that lasted I was there for about 5 years, but it continued to stay open for about 10. I started a free art and culture publication that was also around for about 10 years. And I served like 5 years doing that. And then I was also an artist myself. I did some internships with some galleries when Jack Hanley was in San Francisco. I worked with him, and that was the moment where I was like, I could do this, because Jack was so cool, and just seeing like the artists and, like helping them with their shows, and I was helping install and like doing odd jobs and stuff. And I was like, I can really do this. And San Francisco was like a good kind of beta test for that, because it's so small and compact, so it's like really easy to like be an artist and like have your community and not be in this city that's like so ginormous, like LA or even New York. It's just so difficult to navigate. And then the community there kind of dissolved with the tech boom that happened, pushed everybody out. A lot of the galleries closed. Kind of similar to like a shift that you see today in today's art market,
Yeah.
And then I moved back to LA, reconnected with Karen, and years later, and now we have a daughter, and I have a studio practice, and yeah, it's really special.
Your story about, kind of being Greg, the bad kid, it just shows you that if you give that bad kid direction in their interests, they'll go there, and they'll do it really, really well, and it might be mechanics, it might be art, it might be something else, but we always just kind of label them. And I'm kind of glad that one of those teachers in that roast there kind of, highlighted something that you were actually interested in. And then, they were all willing enough to kind of direct you there as well.
Yeah. And I think that's really important just for people in general. It's like people think about inspiration, right? It's like too artsy fartsy, like when people talk about inspiration, But for me, inspiration is just like it's excitement and curiosity combined. And for anybody that is having challenges in finding their purpose, you will find it by following the thing that most excites you. And it doesn't have to be art. It doesn't have to be like music, or something creative like that. Like you can be fully inspired by accounting and working with numbers. But if it's something that you really love to do and it fascinates you, and then you find all the loopholes and you know how to do this and that, like that's your art form, is accounting, like when you go to these like events like the gala and stuff, you meet all these people and you're like, well, they're like, oh, I wish I could do what you do, And then I'm like, yeah, like being an artist is cool, but like, what do you do? And they're like, oh, I'm a lawyer. And it's like, oh, okay, tell me a little bit more about that. And this gentleman I met, he was so excited about law. I was like, it's like talking to a kid talking about video games, where he's like, yeah, like, with law, you do this, and there's like the language and then like the way that you can maneuver certain things. And like, it's like he was talking about it like a puzzle, And that's how we think about artworks, right? It's like every artwork is a new puzzle. And you just got to keep that excitement up. And that curiosity. So, I think for the people that are labeled as bad kids or, kind of lost, I think it's just because they haven't been nurtured in the way to find what really excites them, or have like the support group to really be like, hey, stop messing around. Yeah. You really like this, just do it. Like, don't let people tell you that you can't achieve your dreams. Like, we're conditioned to think that things aren't possible, and just to work and like have a normal life or whatever, and I'm just like, time is so precious. Back to that conversation around time. It's like, time is so precious. We really don't know what's around the corner. And I would much rather be spending, if I only had a little bit more time to be here, to know that I'm spending it exactly how I want to. Which is, for me, is spending time with my family, spending time with like-minded human beings that really inspire me to like do the things that I care about, from making my artwork and working towards a big like museum exhibition to something small like, being the best dishwasher that I can after dinner and, not slacking on that and doing a good job,
Those small wins.
Yeah.
I like what you said about curiosity. And I have a friend who always says like inspiration is invitation. So if you feel inspired by something, there's an invitation there waiting for you. you know, and sometimes you see something or you go somewhere and you're like, that's amazing. You know, there's probably something in there that's inviting you to kind of go in that direction. And so, you know, you kind of just touched on, you know, maybe, you know, you'd like to work on like a larger museum show. Like, what are some of your future kind of like goals, challenges, hopes, hurdles? Like, what's around the corner in the future?
Around the corner in the future. Well, the first thing is spend as much time as I can with my daughter,
Yeah.
you know, because her presence, her spark is so bright. And it's like, it just makes me want to be a better person, just a better human, you know? And like for her to see her dad and be like, my dad has always just been who he truly is, you know? Because I want her to be her, you know? I don't want people to tell her what to do or, you know, how to do things. You know, obviously there's like nice to have some instruction, but like not to be like overly groomed, you know? For her to just be her like amazing self. And I can only do that through example. So for me, yeah, just follow my heart, you know, where my inner light guides me, you know. And where I am right now is I'm currently working on some more public artwork projects. So we're going to be announcing something in New York, which is really exciting. I'm currently working in LA with an amazing media company called Orange Barrel Media. Having some moving images on some billboards around Los Angeles. There's one right now at the Sunset Strip in West Hollywood. I'm currently working on some ideas for some institutional shows, working with some curators to see like how we can make these things possibilities. And then also just having conversations with more like-minded galleries, you know, that just believe in the Greg Ito studio ethos and want to be a part of, you know, the conversations that really fascinate me. And I don't know, it's like I've learned more in this last year. You know, it's a difficult year for a lot of artists, but to not live with too much conviction for like where you want to see yourself. Because I feel like it almost limits the possibilities, right? If I'm so focused on just like, you know, option A, B, and C, and I'm like holding it so tightly that when something else comes, I'm not open to receive it. Holding what you have with an open hand versus a closed hand. So, you know, if you take some, you know, let's just like use money, right? If you have $1, but you want more money, but you're like gripping that dollar so tightly, close-handed, when more money falls, your hand is closed. You're not able to receive it. But you could still hold what you have, but with an open hand, still open to receive more. And so I feel like I grew up with the closed fist, you know, like through the stories that I told. It's like work hard and, you know, be really tight with what you have and, you know, that kind of mentality, which is totally valid, you know. But for me, I've learned the more that I open up, the more that kind of just blesses me, you know. Like it's amazing how the world, the universe, you know, creator, God, you know, like how it works, you know. And yeah.
It's so counterproductive because it goes against everything we know, you know, like we're told to hold on and we're told to like force these things and we're told to like work for them versus just like allowing them, going where you're wanted, going where you're called, you know, just letting it happen. And then it flows, you know, it works.
Yeah, no, it does. It's because we learn you have to control everything, you know, like, you know, even working in the creative sector, right? It's like being a successful artist, you know, there's a large percentage of it that goes to like these strategies, you know, gallery strategies and promotion and optics and opportunities and all these things, right? But as an artist, you know, it's like we're supposed to be inspired. and it's inspiration is curiosity, and it's supposed to take you in places that you never thought that you would go. And when you're being told to not go for those things and to stay in this lane, stay in this box, eventually you're going to find yourself in a dark place because the box is closing up around you and you're just being kind of commodified or groomed to be like this one type of person, And I'm more than one type of person. I'm many people. I'm like, like my body and my soul is an ecosystem in itself, and it's all connected to everything around me, you know?
And then as we wrap up, what would you kind of say or summarize for like, what is the point of art?
What is the point of art? I've been thinking about this question a lot lately because I'm looking at things from a different angle. Art to me was, at one point, it was like about getting a level of achievement. Like you work really hard, you start in art school, and then you have that one teacher that's like, only 2 of you in this whole classroom is actually going to be a successful artist, and the rest of you are going to be trash, and you're just like, okay, well, thanks for that, and then you learn like you stay working, and and there are lessons in being very consistent, in your practice, right? Like, the more you do things, you actually do notice the more people that don't do it, and as you continue forward, there's less people there, and then you kind of grow and, in that way. But in that way, it just seems so linear, like one way. It made me think of like, what is art? Like, what is art? Is it about millions of dollars for your artwork getting flipped at auction, and then, and then your prices go up and everybody wants it, and like, having these big museum shows? Or is it being someone who heavily works in the merchandising world, making products, doing collaborations? Like, I don't really know, So that's what I'm finding out right now. But for me, what my experiences are kind of distilling down into is that art, for me, it's a catalyst for exchange. Most definitely. And I want that exchange to be as accessible as possible. Like when you walk into an art show, you want to feel comfortable. You want to feel welcomed. You want to feel that curiousness inside of you to just to access the work and learn about it. It's an exchange. It's an intimate exchange where you as the viewer are consuming the ideas and the visual experience from an artist. And from the artist's end, it's like, it's very vulnerable for you to make the work and put yourself in this place where people can judge you and whatever. But art to me, it's a catalyst for exchange. I really want it to cultivate a little bit more where art is more integrated into everyday life. That's separate from like consumerism, just designing things to look nice for people to easily consume them. Like, let's have more conversations. That's why I love public art right now, because that's the artwork that everyone gets to see. Public artwork is accessible to everybody, from the person that's being driven around by their limo driver to the person that's on the bus or like walking to the bus stop, to be able to take that 2-hour ride home, but they still get to interact with this piece. And so that's really important to me. So it's also a way of life, and it doesn't have to be connected to the painting on the wall. You can live your life as an artwork. And I feel like if we can be taught, if people can be reprogrammed to think this way, I just think the exchange and the understanding that comes with that and the acceptance will just grow like exponentially. Because what I've learned, this would be the last thing I say, is like, I did a show at Long Beach Museum of Art, and it was tackling some pretty heavy topics, about loss and growth. And I used the motif of the fires of fire in the work so much. It opened in October. But in January, that's when the fires happened and my show was still up. So for me, I was in this weird space where I was like, oh my God, like my work, it felt like an omen or a precursor to something that actually happened in LA. And I was a little worried, because I was like, I don't know if people are going to think that I'm trying to like capitalize on this conversation of loss. And it made me feel really self-conscious of like the conversations I was having the work and like how I was painting it. But then from January to the end of February, I was really active at the museum to do like walkthroughs and work with students and work with the public and doing like art classes and stuff like that. And I had the most amazing exchanges with the people at the show. Ones that I've never had before through a show at a gallery. Because, the gallery, the people that visit galleries are not like, fifth grade class field trip or like people, family day to go to the museum, right? Like you have to know about the galleries to want to go to them. So when I was having these exchanges in the museum, I was seeing people like find themselves in the most vulnerable place telling me like these stories about like, there's a fifth grader who was looking at the paintings and he was like the fire and they're like, tell us like what this makes you feel about you. Like, and the kid was like, this makes me feel about my parents because they're having a divorce. And he's like, I feel like I'm in the fire. But he's like, but I have my classmates here and I'm actually happy because now I'm seeing these flowers like blooming in this video. And I know it's going to be okay because I still have both my parents. And he like came up to this like amazing thought on his own, And then I was talking to an elderly woman who was like, this is hard for me because I recently lost my mother and I don't really know how to honor her memory yet. And I'm trying to figure that out. But she's like, this show is giving me hope because it's allowing me to navigate the loss. And then I know that it's not everything because she's like, because my daughter is having a daughter, so I'm going to be a grandma now. So it's like, this show is helping me kind of channel my energy into my granddaughter and to like, and that my mom lives through my granddaughter. And it was like, she kind of had like a sense of resolution, from that.
Yeah.
And
it just shows you like that's the power of art. And, you got to see firsthand kind of those stories and the art kind of working.
Oh, yeah.
So to speak.
I was like, there were moments we were like crying and hugging and, it was really special. And that's what really helped fuel my next decisions on like, what kind of art am I making? Where do I want it? Who do I want to see it and why? It's not really much about like what I'm making or how I'm making it, but like, why am I making art? So that's the question that I want to ask myself every day when I wake up.
That's beautiful. Let's leave it there.
Okay,
Thank you so much, Greg.
This is amazing. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of What's the Point? Recorded at Spotify Studios in Los Angeles. Check out our website made by eat.studio. Grant Alexander Peters does our theme music, engineering and editing. Research and pre-show preparation are done by Vern Molidor and Joyce Adams-So from the Shantell Martin studio team. If you like this episode, please consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving a nice 5-star review. Don't forget to check out the show description for more information on today's guest. And you can follow myself and the podcast on Instagram at Shantell_Martin. What's the point? Wind blowing in the trees. Wind blowing between your knees. Wind blowing between the trees. The trees of life. The trees of this time. The trees of my mind. The trees of ultimate time, of ultimate age, of ultimate time, of ultimate ways, of ultimate life, of ultimate time, of ultimate ways, of ultimate life, of ultimate age. Trees blowing between your knees, trees blowing between the breeze. The leaves are blowing, the leaves are blowing, the leaves are blowing between the life. History of wife, history of knife, history of time. Time too much, time too less. We don't have time to figure out why we want to be too much less. Trees blowing in the trees, trees blowing in the breeze. The life of line, the lines of knife, exploring, drawing, drawing time. Drawing is a crime, drawing is a time, drawing is a crime, drawing is a time. The time that you've existed, the time that you existed. The time that you pre-knew, the time that you existed, the time that you resisted, the time that you pre-knew, the time that you knew who. I know, you know, we know, that we all grow, that we all sow. We all sow the history of time and the time of life and the time of this wife. Married to the planet, married to you, married to this and married to now. Be more, see more, go more, grow more, know more, explore more, be more, understand more, see more, figure out more, draw more, read more, be more. You are more. Ignore the left, ignore the right, ignore news night. Ignore the left, ignore the right. You are never right. We are never night. This is not night. This is day, a new dawn, a new sea, a new run. Don't run. Life runs. We run. You run. I run. We run. Running out, running out, running out between the breeze.